The sentence that was supposed to put Kendrick Lamar in a box may have just put Drake in one instead. Because when Drake aimed that "white kids listen to you because they feel some guilt" whine at Kendrick on Janet Shut the Fuck Up, the internet did not hear a clean knockout. It heard a new version of the oldest argument in hip-hop. Who gets to define authenticity? Who gets to critique the culture? And what happens when the person making the critique has spent years benefiting from the exact ecosystem they are now questioning? And that is why this is bigger than a diss bar. It is bigger than the Kendrick Lamar versus Drake scoreboard that people have been obsessing over since 2024. This is about credibility. It is about legacy. It is about what happens when an artist with one of the largest commercial runs in rap history tries to turn a real cultural conversation into a weapon, and the weapon comes back with the safety off. Because the popular framing is that Drake simply took another shot at Kendrick Lamar. That is true, technically, but it is also incomplete. The bar is built around a challenge to Kendrick's audience, the implication that some listeners engage with Kendrick's music out of guilt rather than a genuine relationship with the art. And look, that is not an imaginary discussion. Hip-hop has always had debates about appreciation, appropriation, access, authenticity, money, and who gets to profit when black culture becomes global culture. Those conversations existed before Drake, they existed before Kendrick, they will exist after both of them. But when Drake chose that angle after everything the public has watched unfold in this rivalry, he did not just reignite the beef, he reopened every contradiction people already attached to his name. Personal stakes? Drake is not some underground artist trying to find his voice. He is Drake, a global superstar whose catalog, influence, collaborations, commercial reach, and ability to dominate conversation are almost unmatched in modern rap. Cultural stakes? Kendrick Lamar has become, for a huge part of the audience, the artist associated with craft, confrontation, and rap's deeper traditions, whether everyone agrees with that label or not. Systemic stakes? The Drake-Kendrick story is now tied to streaming narratives, corporate label power, legal disputes, media incentives, fan armies, and the modern machine that can turn one line into 1,000 headlines before listeners have even decided what they think. And there are two timelines running beside each other here. One is the music timeline. Songs, disses, performances, numbers, reactions, and the endless debate over who won. The other is the credibility timeline. Which artist appears to be building from conviction? Which artist appears to be responding to pressure? And which public narratives harden into legacy? Those two timelines are not always the same. A song can perform well, while a perception problem grows underneath it. An artist can have massive reach, while still losing the emotional argument. And when we get to the business and media side of this, especially the way litigation, streaming discourse, and fan ecosystems keep this rivalry alive, you're going to understand why one bar can become much more than a bad punchline. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. First, let's set the record straight. Saying Drake destroyed his own career is a headline. It is commentary. It is not a confirmed fact, and it should not be treated like one. Drake remains one of the most successful artists in the world, with a catalog that can still move rooms, charts, playlists, tours, and conversations. Nobody serious can erase that with a dramatic thumbnail. But career collapse is not the only kind of damage an artist can take. There's also narrative damage. There's symbolic damage. There's the kind of damage where people begin hearing every new move through the filter of the last public loss. That is the pressure Drake is dealing with in this moment. The 2024 conflict with Kendrick Lamar did not end as a normal exchange of records, where both sides went home, shook hands, and let the songs age in peace. It became an enormous cultural event. Kendrick's Not Like Us turned into a record-breaking chart story, a stadium-sized anthem, and a permanent reference point in rap culture. Billboard reported that the track broke the record for the most weeks at #1 on the Hot Rap Songs chart. That doesn't mean every listener agrees on every allegation or every narrative thrown around during the beef. It means the record had a reach that changed how the wider public remembers the conflict.
And that's where Drake's latest angle becomes risky. He's not taking aim at Kendrick in a vacuum. He's taking aim at an artist whose audience now includes people who see Kendrick as a cultural standard bearer, an elite rapper, and the person who landed the biggest public blow in their rivalry. So when Drake frames Kendrick's audience as guilt-driven, he may be trying to puncture that moral authority. He may be saying, your support is performative. Your praise comes from people trying to feel better about themselves. That's a provocative angle. It's not automatically invalid as a subject for discussion, but a provocative angle is only as strong as the messenger's position.
And this is where the internet's reaction makes sense. People did not just ask whether the bar was clever. They asked why Drake was the one delivering it. They asked whether he had earned the moral ground required to make that critique. They looked at his collaborations, his public associations, his long history of moving through different genres and audiences, and they asked the obvious question: is this really an attack on cultural tourism, or is it a tactical argument designed to bruise Kendrick after the beef changed Drake's public standing? That difference matters. One is a serious cultural critique. The other is a diss strategy wearing serious cultural critique like a borrowed jacket. Now, surface evidence first. The line itself is public. Complex and Yahoo Entertainment both covered Drake's apparent criticism of Kendrick's conscious rap image on Janet Shut the F Up. The lyric quickly became the conversation because it is not a standard insult about sales, status, street credibility, or lyrical skill. Drake entered an argument about why people listen to Kendrick. He moved from "your music is bad" to "your audience may be motivated by guilt." That is an entirely different kind of diss because it asks fans to question their own relationship to the artist. And honestly, that is why the line had so much viral power. A direct insult gives fans an easy job. Pick a side, post a reaction, defend your favorite. But a line about the motives of Kendrick's audience makes the audience itself the target. It challenges white listeners, liberal listeners, conscious rap listeners, college-educated listeners, and anybody who sees Kendrick as meaningful beyond the music. Drake did not just say Kendrick is overrated. He implied that a piece of Kendrick's audience might be using the music as emotional self-congratulation. Does that phenomenon exist in the world? Of course it can. There are people who consume political art as a personality accessory. There are people who share socially conscious lyrics without engaging with the ideas behind them. There are people who enjoy the aesthetics of struggle while refusing to confront real inequity when it costs them something. That is not exclusive to hip-hop. It happens in film, fashion, literature, politics, activism, and every other cultural space. The problem is not that Drake raised a question. The problem is that he raised it like the question itself settles the argument. It does not. Because Kendrick Lamar's music has never depended on one demographic to become significant. His work has been rooted in Black identity, personal contradiction, survival, faith, community, violence, trauma, ego, and the emotional cost of navigating America as a Black man. People can debate individual albums, individual collaborators, individual choices, and individual hypocrisies. They should. But reducing Kendrick's impact to guilty listeners is a risky simplification. It gives his supporters a very easy counterargument that Drake is trying to explain away a connection he cannot dismiss through bars alone. Then there's the public history. Billboard's timeline of the Drake-Kendrick relationship makes clear that the rivalry did not begin as a sudden social media misunderstanding. It stretches back through collaborations, competitive tension, subliminals, direct records, and years of status competition. These two artists were treated as part of rap's top tier for a long time. That history is important because it explains why every new diss gets judged against an enormous archive. Fans are not only asking, did this line work? They're asking, what does this line mean after Like That, Push-Ups, Family Matters, Meet the Grams, Not Like Us, and everything that followed? That is a brutal standard. It means Drake cannot just release a sharp moment. He has to release a moment strong enough to change the emotional memory of the entire saga. And Kendrick doesn't have to respond to every provocation for Drake to feel the pressure. Silence can become part of the scoreboard when the public has already decided who owns the last unforgettable moment. The third visible piece is the numbers narrative. The industry loves numbers because numbers look objective. A chart placement feels clean. A streaming total feels final. A number one seems like a verdict. But numbers do not tell the entire story. They tell us reach, they tell us demand, they tell us scale. They do not automatically tell us which artist has greater credibility, which side had the stronger cultural case, or which record will define the era 10 years from now. That is why Not Like Us became more than just a successful diss record. Its chart success helped turn a lyrical battle into a public memory. The song was no longer confined to rap forums or diss track breakdowns. It became a mainstream event. It reached listeners who were not studying every verse, every allegation, every response, or every old interview. Once that happens, an artist is no longer only battling another artist, they are battling the image that has been installed in the public imagination. And Drake knows how that game works better than almost anybody. His career has been built not just on songs, but on scale. He understands moments. He understands internet velocity. He understands how a line, a caption, a feature, a cosign, or a viral clip can become part of a larger brand architecture. That is why it is too easy to call him finished. The man has survived changing sounds, changing platforms, changing audiences, and changing competitors. But surviving is not the same thing as resetting the narrative. That is the job he is trying to do now. The fourth visible piece is the question of association. Billboard documented Drake's 2 appearances on Camila Cabello's album, Hot Uptown and Ugly. That is a normal music business fact. Major artists collaborate across genres and audiences. But in the context of this specific diss, people will inevitably read those choices symbolically. When you question who benefits from proximity to Black culture, your own career becomes part of the evidence board. Not because collaborations are crimes, they are not. Not because genre crossing is immoral, it is not. Hip-hop itself has always borrowed, transformed, sampled, absorbed, and created new language out of collision. But when you launch a critique about authenticity, people will audit your authenticity too. That is not hypocrisy from fans. That is the cost of making the argument. The same goes for Drake's surprise appearance at Morgan Wallen's Houston show, which was widely covered by hip-hop outlets. Again, appearing with another superstar is not proof of anybody's inner beliefs. We do not need to invent motives that have not been documented. But audiences are allowed to interpret public choices, and they will. When an artist chooses the people, spaces, platforms, and collaborations around them, those choices become part of their public story. Drake's critics see the Morgan Wallen appearance, the Camila Cabello collaboration, the streamer ecosystem around him, and the new Kendrick line as connected. Drake's supporters may see it as proof that he is a boundaryless global artist who can move wherever he wants. Both readings exist, but only one of them currently has the momentum of the broader post-beef narrative. And I think we need to set the truth on what is actually happening here. Drake did not get punished because he made a controversial bar. Rap is built on controversial bars. He is facing pushback because the bar asks for trust. It asks the listener to believe Drake is speaking from a place larger than competitive resentment. It asks listeners to accept that he is diagnosing a cultural problem rather than simply looking for a new way to diminish Kendrick's support. And when the audience does not grant you that trust, the bar starts sounding less like a truth bomb and more like a complaint dressed up in theory. Now, let's talk about the cultural side, because this is where the situation gets even more uncomfortable for everybody pretending this is just another stand war. Hip-hop culture has always had a complicated relationship with outside validation. There is no single gatekeeper who can decide who belongs. There should not be. Music travels, art travels, listeners come from everywhere. But there is a difference between being welcomed into a culture and assuming that buying access means you own the culture's meaning. Kendrick's audience is broad. Drake's audience is broad. That is the reality of being global artists. But their audiences are often discussed differently because their work is framed differently. Kendrick is frequently framed as a lyricist, a storyteller, a social observer, and an album artist whose projects demand interpretation.
Drake is frequently framed as a hitmaker, a mood architect, an adaptable superstar, and a master of personal language songs that can soundtrack people's relationships, celebrations, and insecurities. Neither frame fully captures either artist. Both artists are more complicated than their fandom stereotypes, but those frames shape how fans hear the diss. For Kendrick supporters, the lyrics sounded like Drake dismissing a black artist's serious work by blaming the wrong people for its impact. For Drake supporters, it sounded like a blunt observation about parts of the conscious audience that reward Kendrick with a kind of moral praise they wouldn't give to other artists. Those are not identical arguments. One is about art's meaning, the other is about audience behavior. The problem is that the diss blends them together. And when you blend them together, you invite a response that is much bigger than the song. You invite people to ask whether Drake is attacking performative allyship while still being comfortable in media ecosystems that often turn black pain, conflict, slang, and identity into content. You invite people to examine the difference between being commercially adjacent to the culture and being accountable to it. You invite people to ask who gets called universal and who gets called too political. And before Drake fans get mad at that sentence, ask yourselves, is that not exactly why the line created so much heat? Nobody has to pretend Drake has not made an enormous contribution to rap. His commercial impact is documented. His influence on melody, emotional openness, internet-era rap language, and crossover sound is undeniable. He has helped shape the sound of an entire generation. But influence is not immunity. A great career does not mean every critique lands. A brilliant hitmaker can still misjudge a moment. A global star can still sound defensive. A person can be right that an issue exists and still be the wrong messenger for that issue. And oh, do I have more. Because the moment you stop treating this as a simple lyric debate and start looking at how the modern music machine turns narratives into weapons, the real picture comes into focus. Drake fans are going to hate this part because this is not about whether you can find a clever interpretation of the bar. Of course you can. The question is why the public is so willing to hear it as a boomerang. And the answer is hiding in the exact system Drake has dominated for years. The system of numbers, media cycles, platform incentives, fan mobilization, and corporate conflict.
Here is the pattern interrupt. Stop thinking about music for a second. Stop thinking about who had the better beat, who had the cleaner flow, or whose fan base posted more edits. The deepest part of this story is not musical, it is industrial. The first industry angle is brand architecture. In the streaming era, artists do not simply release songs, they maintain a constant public identity. Every feature, stream appearance, playlist placement, interview clip, public friendship, silence, lawsuit, social post, and diss contributes to that identity. The artist is no longer only an artist. The artist is a permanent media channel. And the bigger the artist becomes, the harder it is to separate the song from the brand. Drake's brand was built on dominance. The message was consistent. He is the one with the hits, the reach, the adaptability, the cultural presence, the ability to make any room feel like his room. That brand works brilliantly when the conversation is about output and scale. But a public rap battle creates a different test. It asks not only, can you make the record? It asks, can you control the meaning of the moment? And those are different skills. Kendrick's brand, meanwhile, is built around scarcity, deliberation, and the sense that when he speaks, he intends for people to study it. That can be frustrating for listeners who want more music, more access, more explanation. But in a conflict, scarcity can become power. The less an artist speaks, the more every move gets interpreted as intentional. Drake's constant visibility can be an advantage in normal times. In a credibility crisis, it can create more opportunities for the audience to scrutinize every move. The second industry angle is the economics of attention. Platforms reward heat. Outrage is efficient. Clips create reaction videos. Reaction videos create arguments. Arguments create searches. Searches create more content.
The original artistic statement can become almost irrelevant once the reaction economy starts moving. A bar that might have been a minor provocation in a previous era can now become thousands of TikToks, X posts, YouTube breakdowns, Reddit threads, podcasts, and headlines within hours. That is why people need to be careful about saying the internet is burning as if the internet itself is a neutral jury. The internet is not a jury, it is a machine that rewards people for making the loudest possible case. It can exaggerate a flop, it can inflate a win, it can turn one loud fan community into a false consensus. It can also capture real shifts in feeling before the industry admits they are happening. The job of a serious commentator is not to pretend the viral reaction is meaningless, it is to separate the reaction from the evidence. And the evidence here is not that Drake's career is over. The evidence is that the line met an audience already primed to challenge Drake's authority on this exact subject. That is why it spread. That is why people started pulling up public associations, prior lyrics, old clips, and the broader history of the beef. The line activated a pre-existing doubt. The third industry angle is the legal and corporate dimension. Drake's legal action against Universal Music Group over Not Like Us moved this rivalry beyond the familiar language of rap competition. The original complaint stated that the action was against UMG rather than Kendrick Lamar or another artist. A federal judge later dismissed the case in October 2025, and reporting in 2026 indicated that Drake appealed. That sequence matters because it changes the frame around the beef. We are no longer only talking about two artists exchanging records, we are talking about a public conflict that became entangled with corporate ownership, distribution, alleged promotional practices, defamation arguments, and the enormous power of a music company that sits above individual artists. Think about how strange that is. A rap beef begins with artists fighting for cultural position. Then the fallout grows so large that the conversation reaches a court system, a label structure, and questions about how a record gets amplified across platforms. That does not make Drake weak for using legal tools. Artists are allowed to defend what they believe harms them. Legal action is not inherently an admission of defeat. But culturally, it creates a new problem. Rap audiences often judge conflict through a different moral code than courts do. The courtroom asks whether a claim meets a legal standard. Hip-hop asks whether a response feels like a response. Those are not the same universe. And this is why the new Kendrick line carries such a heavy burden. In the public mind, Drake is trying to fight on multiple fronts at once, musically, legally, commercially, and narratively. The more fronts you have, the harder it becomes to deliver one clean message. Every new record is heard beside the lawsuit. Every public appearance is heard beside Not Like Us. Every attempt to redirect the conversation is measured against the fact that Kendrick's diss became a cultural event far beyond the normal limits of a rap record. Here's the truth bomb. The biggest thing Drake may have damaged with that bar is not his chart position, not his money, and not his ability to make hits. It's his ability to decide what the Kendrick conflict is about. That is the real loss of control. Drake wants the argument to be about Kendrick's audience. Kendrick's supporters want the argument to be about Drake's credibility. The media wants the argument to be about controversy. The platforms want the argument to be about engagement. The legal process wants the argument to be about specific claims and standards. And the public, which is the only audience that matters when legacy is being written, is taking pieces from all of those arguments and creating its own conclusion. The line was supposed to make Kendrick look dependent on a performative audience. Instead, it invited people to ask whether Drake's own network of associations makes him an awkward person to lecture anyone about cultural extraction. It was supposed to make Kendrick's social positioning look calculated. Instead, it reminded people that Kendrick has been associated with culturally serious work for years, long before this specific exchange. It was supposed to redraw the battle map. Instead, it may have revealed that Drake is still fighting the last war on terms he didn't choose.
And that is devastating, not because it erases Drake's career, but because it exposes the difference between power and persuasion. Drake still has power. He still has reach. He still has an audience that will show up, defend him, stream him, quote him, and wait for his next move. But persuasion is different. Persuasion is the ability to say something controversial and have the culture grant you the benefit of the doubt. That benefit of the doubt is what appears to be under pressure. The artist who wins the longest legacy battle is not always the artist with the most immediate noise. It is often the artist whose actions, work, and public choices make the audience feel that the story adds up. Right now, Kendrick's advantage is not merely that Not Like Us succeeded. It is that his image, his silence, his performances, and his perceived artistic discipline allow supporters to interpret new Drake attacks as evidence of Kendrick's lingering impact. One person is still trying to move the conversation. The other person has become the conversation's measuring stick. That is the contrast that matters. And listen, there is room for nuance. Kendrick Lamar is not beyond criticism. No major artist is. His catalog, collaborators, public choices, and silence can all be analyzed. His fans can absolutely be too eager to turn every move into proof of sainthood. Drake fans are not wrong to push back on selective moralizing in hip-hop discourse. But fairness cuts both ways. If Drake wants to critique a certain kind of audience behavior, he has to accept that listeners will examine the behavior of the ecosystem around him too. That is not hate. That is accountability. So the hero resolution here is not Kendrick is perfect and Drake is finished. That is lazy. The real resolution is that artistic integrity is not a costume you put on when the beef requires it. It is a pattern that audiences can recognize over time. Kendrick supporters believe he is still winning because they see a pattern: careful work, strategic timing, a willingness to make difficult art, and a public presence that does not appear to depend on explaining every move in real time. Drake supporters believe he is still winning because they see a different pattern: consistency, range, output, commercial dominance, and an ability to remain relevant through every shift in the culture. But this specific moment favors Kendrick because Drake's bar unintentionally reinforces the question Kendrick's side wants everyone to ask: who is speaking from conviction and who is speaking from damage control? This is only the start, because there are at least two developments that could reshape the story again. First, the appeal in Drake's dispute with UMG has the potential to keep the business and legal aftermath of Not Like Us in the public conversation long after casual listeners have moved on. Whatever happens next will not simply be a courtroom update. It will become another battle over narrative, power, and whether music companies can shape outcomes that artists later have to live with. Second, the music itself remains unpredictable. Drake can still release a record that reframes the discussion. Kendrick can still choose to speak, or choose not to, which might be even louder, in a rivalry where absence has become part of the mythology. But if you are watching this story closely, do not get distracted by the loudest reaction. Watch the patterns. Watch who the artists stand beside. Watch what arguments they choose. Watch what they say when they have the chance to change the subject. And watch whether the culture believes them when they do. Because the next video needs to be about the part nobody can skip. Drake's appeal against UMG is not just a legal footnote to the Kendrick Lamar battle. It may be the clearest sign yet that the biggest fight was never only happening on wax. One artist made a diss song that became a cultural monument. The other took the fallout into the corporate system that distributed it. And when we break down what that could mean for artists, labels, streaming platforms, and the future of rap beefs, the real power structure behind this entire saga starts to show itself.